it seems like for the first time in a long time, the Utah Jazz continue to be front and center in a lot of NBA people's minds about what they're going to do this summer. And I can tell you, talking to NBA folks that I am cordial with, yesterday, again, it was very clear that the Utah Jazz are absolutely being aggressive in shopping Rudy Gobert, and I would expect a trade to happen within the next month. It would be my guess that Rudy Gobert will no longer be a Utah Jazz man. But of course, the question is, what is Rudy Gobert's trade value? And Jake, I guess where I want to start with this conversation is, what is it you need to get in return? Just on a baseline level, what do you need to get in return if you're going to trade Rudy Gobert?
Yeah, I mean, just on a baseline level, my goal would be to get back an all-star, one all-star player. That has to be the baseline for the trade. And then obviously, you're going to ask for a pick or something to supplement that. And I think that the thing with Rudy is that he is an all-star level player. He is a multi-time defensive player of the year player in the league. And I think that he can bring a lot of value to certain teams. Now, we told you that those teams are out east, that, Chicago, Toronto, maybe even, you're looking at a possible scenario where Charlotte might want to get involved, maybe, like, so you have options out east. And I think the biggest thing for the Jazz in this whole Rudy trade conversation that they're having is that they need to find the line of the price they're going to pay to move his money versus getting value back in the trade. And that's why I say, if I'm the Jazz, my goal has to be, my baseline minimum have to have it is one all-star player for another all-star player, And then from that point, if you can get that done, then I think from there you can have negotiations around picks or who you're going to send in addition to Rudy maybe, or, whatever the case may be, whatever, because we don't know what the setup's going to be. We don't know if it's going to be a 2 or a 3-teamer. A 3-teamer is definitely more feasible based on Rudy's money. But my point just is that if you're the Jazz, you have to be committed to making sure that you don't take too much of a beating on this trade, because it's not going to be acceptable to essentially give Rudy away for a rack of basketballs. That's not going to work, obviously. So, but the problem is that teams know the Jazz don't have draft picks. Teams know that the Jazz are tight on the cap. That they don't have a lot of flexibility and options within their situation. And when that's the case, there's a price to be paid if you're the Utah Jazz. So that's why I say my main priority if I'm the Jazz, whether it is just them and one other team or if it's a 3-teamer and like 7 players involved, my minimum is getting one all-star player back and not losing my ass on the deal. That would be my mindset with trading Rudy Gobert.
I think the biggest issue is defining value and what Rudy's value is. I can tell you right now, NBA sources have told me the Jazz are going to drive a tough bargain. You're looking at Rudy Gobert, and the Jazz believe that they have somebody who is a 3-time defensive player of the year who they can leverage to bring talent in return. But from what I'm also told by multiple NBA sources, the Utah Jazz are going to struggle to get a superstar in return. And the 2 teams that the Utah Jazz have spoken to the most or who have shown the most interest in Rudy Gobert are the Toronto Raptors and the Chicago Bulls.
Yeah.
The issue for the Chicago Bulls is obviously the looming free agency of Zach LaVine is hanging over their heads. And Zach LaVine has made it very clear that he wants a max contract. The problem for the Bulls, and maybe the solution for the Bulls here, is they can offer Zach LaVine just about $50 million more than anybody else. And the teams that Zach LaVine has shown the most interest to would be the Portland Trail Blazers, who can offer him a maximum contract. Zach is from the Pacific Northwest, so it makes a lot of sense. That the Portland Trail Blazers are attempting to rebuild that roster, but are they really going to sign a guy on Zach LaVine's level when they're also trying to sell the team? That's a big question. The other place that he is very clearly a fit is the Dallas Mavericks. The Dallas Mavericks, however, do not have the cap space to pay Zach LaVine what he believes he's worth.
Yeah.
Now, does he get a max? I don't know. The Chicago Bulls have said very clearly, we are willing to pay the luxury tax to keep Zach LaVine. But if you know the Chicago Bulls the way I know the Chicago Bulls, I can tell you right now, paying the luxury tax and giving Zach LaVine that supermax extension that he wants are two very different things. And again, when you're talking about paying a guy $210 million, which is the number that they can offer Zach LaVine at the top of the pay grade, I would tell you that I am very skeptical of whether the Chicago Bulls will pay that price. They have not historically been a team, whether it's Michael Jordan or any other free agency in their history, they have been very hesitant under Jerry Reinsdorf to pay what needs to be paid to keep their star players in a Bulls uniform. Mm-hmm. So I am very skeptical that the Chicago Bulls are willing to give Zach LaVine the full freight. I think if they don't offer him the maximum extension, if they don't offer him that $210 million, I believe it is, I think Zach LaVine's going to wind up in another uniform. And do not forget, he is an unrestricted free agent. So it is up to Zach where he goes and if he returns to Chicago. I think that situation could have a significant impact on the Utah Jazz ability to trade Rudy Gobert to the Chicago Bulls. Now, let's say that they are able to make that deal. I don't believe that a sign and trade for Zach and Rudy Gobert makes a lot of sense. I don't believe. I think this is a 3-team deal simply because the Bulls are not going to give up DeMar DeRozan or Zach LaVine to get Rudy Gobert. That doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Because the Chicago Bulls have pretty much said, hey, we committed this money to this group of guys. We want to keep this group of guys together, and we need to get better defensively, especially on the interior. And it doesn't make sense that you would sign and trade Zach LaVine, bring in Rudy Gobert, and take a significant hit offensively, because if you do that deal, you're also probably going to have to take somebody in return from the Jazz. But think about what comes this way. What comes to Utah if you trade a Rudy Gobert to the Bulls? What comes to Utah is probably Patrick Williams. If I'm the Chicago Bulls, am I really wanting to give up who is arguably my best defensive player on the perimeter?
Yeah.
I don't know. Does Rudy Gobert help you that much defensively? Absolutely he does. Right now, the biggest issue for the Chicago Bulls is that they cannot stop anybody at the rim, right? Derrick Jones Jr. has been probably their best big, if you will, and he's not really a big. Nikola Vucevic is a net negative defensively. For everything that he can do offensively, and everybody says he's a multi-time All-Star, trust me when I tell you, Nikola Vucevic is not anybody's best defensive player, and he never will be.
Yeah.
So if you're the Chicago Bulls, on its face, Rudy Gobert for Nikola Vucevic is a huge upgrade. But there's a lot more involved in that. And I think making a deal with the Bulls is going to be a lot more complex than just simply making a straight-up trade, which is why I continue to hear that Toronto realizes that they have an opportunity to make a deal with the Utah Jazz. My feeling is that they are willing to part with Pascal Siakam to get Rudy Gobert. I think they value him at that level. It'll be interesting to see what else they want. And my question is, frankly, does a Pascal Siakam get you Rudy Gobert? I don't know, Jake. My opinion is that you're going to have to give up an OG Anunoby. You're going to have to give up a young wing player in addition to Siakam to get Rudy Gobert.
Yeah, it can't just be Pascal Siakam. It has to be, and this is what I mean when we talk about defining value in different situations and different trade setups. Every trade setup is different. So, again, like my point and my opinion is that your baseline standard has to be getting an all-star level player in return. But like with a Pascal Siakam, based on what he's done the last 2 seasons, I wouldn't want Pascal Siakam. I'd have to have, an OG Anunoby or someone else as part of that deal for me to feel like, okay, we just traded away a 3-time defensive player of the year and somebody who is an elite rim protector for this. And you have said many times on the show that Ryan Smith and this front office group really needs a win. This Rudy Gobert thing cannot be messed up. This Rudy Gobert thing cannot leave the same sentiment that trading, Joe Ingles for basically Nickeil Alexander-Walker and nothing had. You can't have that. When you trade Rudy Gobert, you need to understand that when you pull the trigger on that deal, it better be a good deal for the Utah Jazz. And that's why I say, I'm happy to hear that they're driving a hard bargain. I would be, think about it. What other leverage do the Utah Jazz have outside of trading Rudy? Because once you trade Rudy, you really lose all the leverage you have. on your roster because you don't have draft picks. You don't have another guy you're willing to trade. Like, you're not going to trade Donovan Mitchell, as we've told you 100 times, right? So that's why I say, like, when you pick up the phone and you call other teams like Toronto or Chicago or Charlotte or whoever, when you say, hey, we want to trade Bojan Bogdanovic. Okay, cool. We're willing to give you a pick for that or something. We're willing to give you low value for that. So my point just is with the Rudy Gobert situation, they have to capitalize. This has to be a win, and it has to be something that brings them tangible, difference-making talent on the floor, or else it's not good enough. That's my true opinion. So if that's one all-star and a pick, and then you get a guy in the draft, great. If that's not an all-star, but two, fringe all-star players that can really come in and play elite defense for you and be assets to Donovan on the floor, great. But whatever you do, it has to pan out to making this team better and leaving Donovan Mitchell in a place where he feels like, okay, yes, I can work with this. We can go and beat teams with this, and now we're off and running. That's what I think the minimum has to be.
Yeah, and I just don't think Pascal Siakam is a smart acquisition. If I am the Utah Jazz, that's too much money. He's a guy that's making $35 million a year. He's got 2 years left on that deal at a minimum. I just don't think that deal makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you look at the numbers and you look at like OG Anunoby, that's a guy that's making $17 million. And he's got multiple years left on that deal. But beyond that, I mean, you're not getting the guy you would want probably on that roster to go with this deal is Gary Trent Jr.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a guy who is a difference-making defensive player for you. That's a guy that can play the wing and play multiple, perimeter positions to guard multiple, perimeter positions. And by the way, he's making $17 million. I mean, those, to me, OG Anunoby and Gary Trent Jr. are the core pieces of a deal for Rudy Gobert. That's where that deal has to start. A lot of people have asked me, well, what about Fred VanVleet? Or Fred VanVleet's not going anywhere. Toronto is married to Fred VanVleet. He likes being there. They like him being the centerpiece of their team. They want to move, in my opinion, Pascal Siakam because he has been a bit of an enigma for them. Pascal Siakam's not been the star player that they hoped that he would be, and I think they know that they're probably at their ceiling with him.
Yeah.
So moving Rudy Gobert and getting Siakam in return is not attractive to me. I would rather make the Vucevic deal in Chicago because he's on an expiring contract.
Yeah.
And if he doesn't give you what you need in the middle, okay, at least he can shoot a three and at least he can move the basketball at a pretty high level. And by the way, he's got a pretty good back to the basket game.
Yeah.
So he can play at all three levels. He is an excellent jump shooter, both from three. For his size, he's a good three-point shooter. He is a good mid-range player, and he can play with his back to the basket. I can live with that suckage for 1 year defensively.
Yeah, and
right?
I think that's your best point on him. Like him being an expiring contract. That's the other narrative that you got to keep in your mind here as a Jazz fan when we're talking about trading guys. Expiring deals that like will expire next season that you could move at the deadline to then go and get another guy. That's also a factor you have to consider. So I agree with you. I think the Chicago deal has benefits, but I think that to me, when I hear Rudy Gobert for OG Anunoby and Gary Trent Jr., I don't mind that so much. I like that. That gives you options. That gives you some scoring. That gives you some defense. Those are pliable players, as I like to say. Those are guys, as you were just saying, those are guys that can do a lot for you. So I wouldn't necessarily mind that. But, man, I really like – I got to tell you, I really like the sound of Rudy for Vucevic and Patrick Williams and then trading Vucevic at the deadline this coming season to get another player. I like the sound of that as well. So, I don't know. This is what I mean. It's such a difficult thing to predict, like, where they'll wind up with Rudy and in this trade because of Rudy's contract and how that impacts trades and the fact that the Jazz don't have draft picks, that also really impacts the conversation they're able to have. So if I'm Danny Ainge, Toronto is probably option one, Chicago is probably option two, and then I definitely got to curate, a third option as a backup plan. That's probably how I would be stacking these options if I was him.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to make a deal with Chicago right now. There's not a lot of clarity, and it'll be interesting to see how patient will the Utah Jazz be in making this move. I mean, It to me, it makes the most sense. And we've talked about trading Rudy Gobert for a long time. And the hard part is that Rudy is a valuable contributor.
Yeah.
He's a guy that's a 3-time defensive player of the year. That has real value. I would not be giving him away on the cheap.
Yeah.
I need leverage. I need return.
Yeah.
The problem is when you look up and down, I just don't see that a deal with Toronto or Chicago is going to be easy to make. You better understand that this is going to be a very difficult deal to make. I think that when I look at the Toronto deal, I still maintain that I would probably include Trent Forrest in that deal.
Mm-hmm.
I think the issue is that trade on its own, if you bring in an OG Anunoby and a Gary Trent Jr., you're not a better basketball team. And you've got to, there needs to be another move, right? If you bring in a Patrick Williams, if you bring in a Nikola Vucevic, and, let's say you get a Javonte Green as part of that deal, or you get, a Kobe White as part of that deal. Now you're probably the same team, right? Because you're better defensively. There's no doubt about that. Patrick Williams is a guy that has a massive upside.
Yeah.
Massive. He's already a really good perimeter defender. But you know what? I mean, you're not going to get one of their best young players. You're not going to get an Ayo Dosunmu in that deal.
Yeah.
And yesterday on Twitter, I saw a lot of people saying, I'd have to have Ayo Dosunmu. Well, then you're not going to make a trade with the Bulls.
Yeah, that's not happening.
And the thing that you have to understand is the Bulls are not going to give up their future or their present. They're going to get better. If they're going to trade Rudy Gobert to Chicago, the Bulls are going to have to feel like they're getting better. They're taking on a ton of money.
Yeah.
For a guy that's limited offensively. And a lot of people also asked yesterday, really, a really good question is, what impact does Rudy Gobert have on an offense when he goes into a Chicago, a Toronto?
Well, I think this is about his mindset. I mean, his impact on an offense is what he's willing to do and not do. And I think that, again, I'm sure we're going to get more James Knight comments or more comments today saying that we hate Rudy Gobert. And it's not that I hate Rudy Gobert, but I think the tape speaks for itself. Pull up YouTube and watch his offensive game. His impact on an offense is setting good screens. He's one of the best screen setters in the league. He is elite at that, no doubt about it. He knows how to set a dirty screen without it getting called. And I love that about him. I think that's an absolute asset for an offense. However, I think the problem is that after that screen is set, if he's not involved in the pick and roll and a lob to get a dunk, he's just somebody that's standing off to the side essentially offensively. And that's the tough part. But here's what I'll say. For those of you who do watch Bulls basketball, because, we did watch a lot of Bulls basketball this year, one of the things that I think is attractive about Rudy Gobert and your offense is you are already playing two-man basketball. You were already playing pick and roll with DeMar and Vucevic to get DeMar at the elbow. You were already doing that. So if you can upgrade DeMar's options and you can give him somebody that can really finish at the rim and really kind of be a force around the rim, that is an upgrade, in my opinion, for how they like to run offense. We're not talking about the Warriors in a motion offense and constantly running around. That's not what we're talking about. And by the way, in my opinion, yes, the Bulls run a little bit, but they're a little bit slower of an offense, in my opinion. They've got a lot of mid-range guys. They've got a lot of guys that like to play one-on-one. So that's why I say, I think for the Bulls specifically, Rudy is a good fit. In fact, he's an upgrade to what they have now. The only question is, how much are the Bulls going to ask the Jazz to contribute financially on the Rudy Gobert deal, on his money? Because I think that's also something that the Jazz are going to face. Hey, you want to make a Rudy Gobert trade? How much are you willing to contribute on his contract? I think that's going to be a big factor in these trades.
Well, and I also think that you have to continue to look at other options to improve the Utah Jazz roster. I mean, I still think that there's a deal to be done with Houston. I still think there's a deal to be done with Boston. And the third team I'd be looking at for Rudy Gobert is the Atlanta Hawks. I mean, I think Atlanta is really trying to win now. I think they know what they have in Trae Young. I think they know what they have in John Collins, and that's a guy they'd like to move. Yeah. But I think John Collins has $100 million left on his contract. I mean, so that's a hefty deal, but he's a guy that's in demand out there in the league. So I know that Atlanta values Rudy Gobert.
Yeah.
But I think to me, Chicago is probably the best dance partner here for Rudy Gobert. And I also wonder where does Bojan wind up? Where does Bojan Bogdanovic wind up? And I think that there's a lot of value out there for him. I mean, again, I still maintain Bojan Bogdanovic is a guy that you will trade to any other team in the NBA.
Yeah.
You'll trade him to Dallas. You'll trade him to, I mean, he fits in a lot of places. Mike Conley fits in a lot of places.
Take their names out of it and just describe them as players. What is Bojan Bogdanovic? He is a sniper. That's it. He's not an offensive player. He's not an off-the-dribble guy, even though everyone wants to say he's got some great back-to-the-basket game. He doesn't, right? He just does that for the Jazz. For a playoff team, for a contender, he's a come off the bench, or maybe even start. I could see him starting for like an Atlanta Hawks maybe. But he is a come into the game, starting or otherwise, and knock down shots. That's what he is. He is Duncan Robinson 2.0, in my opinion.
And I think that's the other team that you need to watch for Bojan Bogdanovic.
Yeah.
I think Danny Ainge has deep, long-lasting relationships in this league, and I think that Bojan Bogdanovic is a guy that puts a lot of contenders. You look at the teams that lost in the playoffs this year, the Dallases of the world, the Miamis of the world. I think you're looking at Boston. If Boston loses the NBA Finals, I think they're going to trade Marcus Smart. And I think Marcus Smart is exactly that dude that the Jazz should value. And I know everybody says, well, Marcus Smart's black and he didn't want to play here. And that was a huge issue.
Mm-hmm.
That was a huge issue. Marcus Smart did not want to work out for the Utah Jazz. Marcus Smart is a guy, though, that I think is a different player than he was then. And if Marcus Smart can thrive in Boston, which he has, he can thrive in Utah.
Yes, he can.
And I think that if the Jazz want to address issues, I would go back to Boston and I would do everything that I can do to make that deal. And by the way, not for nothing, and I know we do a lot of, and I'm trying, and I mean this when I say this, I am trying my best to do less of the I told you so on this show.
Don't lie to me.
Okay, I'm not really trying my best if we're being honest. But if you look at what we tweeted the other day about who they were going to interview, and everybody ripped me on Twitter the other day, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. When I said that they were going to interview young coaches that are assistants.
Right.
That is going to be their target. They are not a team that is out here trying to they're not out here trying to hire the
Terry
Mike D'Antonis, the Terry Stotts, who they're going to interview. They're going to interview those guys. But I'm telling you now that they are going to interview guys like Charles Lee, which I said the other day.
Yeah.
And everybody's like, who's Charles Lee?
What I just said.
Right? I said the other day, names to watch. And this was Sunday. Names to watch for the Utah Jazz. Terry Stotts, Celtics assistant Will Hardy, and Bucks assistant Charles Lee.
How about that?
Who did the Jazz get permission to interview yesterday? Will Hardy, Charles Lee, and Terry Stotts are all on their interview list. They're going to hire. In my opinion, I think this comes down to Johnny Bryant and Will Hardy, in my opinion. I think those are the two guys I'd be watching. Charles Lee, I was again told yesterday, Charles Lee is they're going to seriously vet Charles Lee. And I think they should. And I think Will Hardy, I think Charles Lee is going to be a star coach in this league.
Yeah.
I do.
Well, all three of these guys are going to have successful coaching careers. It's really just a matter of who fits what you need now.
But boy, and I understand with Bryant, I get it. Will Hardy is going to be a guy that's going to make it awfully difficult not to hire him.
Yes, he is.
He is going to make it very difficult not to
Because what does he have? What does he have right now? He's got playoff experience.
And he is in an organization that Danny Ainge knows well. Obviously in Boston, he is on a team that's in the NBA Finals right now. He has got a good history. Charles Lee, again, I mean, Darvin Ham coming off that staff.
Yeah.
I'm telling you that those guys, I didn't tweet their names for no reason. Those guys are very, very very much on everybody's radar
Yeah.
as the next star coaches in this league.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, if you're a Jazz fan, and when they hire one of these guys, and I have to agree, Johnny Bryant, obviously with the connection to the organization, everyone wants to put him as the favorite. But I think these other guys have great chances, and I think whether you're talking about the NBA or the NFL, like we went through this in the NFL too, right? Let's not forget, like all these guys, all these young coaches, the Cliff Kingsburys, the Sean McVays, all these young coaches got hired, and who ended up winning? Who ended up winning? The young head coaches. All of them got really good teams, and they went to the postseason. All of them. So that's what I'm saying. If you're the Utah Jazz, prioritize Donovan Mitchell. Hire a young guy that's energetic, that understands the culture, that he can connect with, that he can have a great relationship with, and then let's see what you can do. And I'm telling you, through this summer, my expectation, if I was a Jazz fan, no matter what happens this summer, with whatever they get back for Rudy and whoever they hire and however it looks, don't expect a championship this coming year, but the next year. That's when I would start expecting to get some serious traction in the postseason. Because you need a season to put the team together. You need a season for them to play together and build chemistry and do all that good stuff. And then now you have a battleship that can go in and get through adversity on the floor.
Yeah, I think there's a real good chance that I just think that there's a trade to be made with Boston.
Yeah.
There is a trade to be made with Boston. I mean, they have pieces that they want to move.
But this is the trade deadline
that make you better. Yeah, well,
right?
But this is why you waited at the trade deadline if you're Boston, because I think they knew that they had a chance to make a difference on the roster, but they also knew that they could compete in the East where everybody was going to beat up on each other. And Marcus Smart, as it turns out, has been a pivotal player for them.
Yep.
And the other thing I really like about Marcus Smart is if you're able to get Marcus Smart, because again, I'm not saying that that's going to happen, but they've tried. If you're able to get Marcus Smart, he is very affordable, but I also like that could be a 3-team deal.
Yeah.
And, again, the question is, what does Boston need? I think they need a player that will complement Jason Tatum.
Bojan Bogdanovic.
Well, and I think Mike Conley's another guy that fits there.
Yeah.
They need an on-ball general, and Mike Conley is that guy. Mike Conley is a vet who can mentor guys that can help you improve.
Yeah.
You can say a lot of things about Rudy Gobert, but Rudy Gobert's best offensive use is when Mike Conley's on the floor throwing him lobs.
Well, and I think after the year Mike Conley had, I think we can all agree that, I'm not going to sit here and say his offensive game is regressing, but he just had a rough year offensively, as far as individual scoring. And so for a team like Boston, you're not going to ask him to score a ton. I mean, yeah, sure, he'll get, your 15 points a game, but you're not going to ask him to be 25 a night. You're going to ask him to be, 10 a night with 10 assists. That's what you want.
Get me 2 3-pointers a game.
Yeah.
Move the basketball. Do the little things that right now Boston doesn't have a point guard.
Frickin' Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown in positions to score.
Get Jason Tatum off the ball. Get Jason Tatum off the ball. Because Ime Udoka's offense works better when they move.
Yeah.
And you're seeing right now, when you look at Golden State, by the way, if you're going to watch the finals tonight, one of the things I'd really encourage you to do, watch the relationship with Steph Curry and Draymond Green. You watch those little, what they call twist screens, where Draymond Green gets the ball, like Steph Curry, there's that highlight of Steph Curry throwing that cross corner pass to Draymond Green, who takes one dribble, steps up, and then just turns around and Steph Curry's run the baseline, comes behind him, and shoots a 3 and makes it. Like, that's the relationship. That's the off-the-ball movement that 9 out of 10 NBA teams don't have, but everybody wants. And so when you look at that relationship, that's what a team like Boston doesn't have for Jason Tatum. They don't have a guy to facilitate his success. Frankly, the Utah Jazz don't have a guy to facilitate Don's success. And I think you've seen that right now anyways, Mike Conley's not that dude anymore, right? I think Father Time is undefeated, as we always say on this show. So I look at what the Jazz are doing. They're being ultra aggressive in the trade market, and I love it. I think this is exactly what they should be doing, because everybody thinks deals get done the day they're announced. Deals are getting done right now. I am telling you now, deals are getting done on a daily basis right now.
Yeah.
And the sooner that you begin to make those phone calls, and if you're going to make a deal in the summer, it's probably going to be not probably. The foundation for that deal will be laid at the deadline.
Yeah.
And I think that's why you heard that the Jazz were the most aggressive team at the deadline, not necessarily to make a deal at the deadline, but to make sure that the groundwork was laid so you could make a deal this summer, Jake. And I think they've absolutely done that.
Yeah, and I think this is what you would expect out of Danny Ainge, frankly. And I think that, this is kind of why I was really hoping at the presser the other day that someone would have asked just a general, even a softballish question about like, hey, like, how aggressive were you guys at the deadline? Truly, like, were there good conversations had, or like, just something around that? Because I completely agree. It makes perfect sense if you think about it. Like you're going to go out at the deadline knowing that you're probably not going to make a franchise altering move, but this summer changes have to happen. You know that. Anybody who knows anything about basketball and watched this team knows it was required. And that's why I'm saying, like, Danny Ainge, like, Ryan Smith deserves a ton of credit for Danny Ainge coming in. And I really hope that this first deal with Rudy Gobert that Danny makes is one of those deals where you're like, okay, we've clearly rounded the corner here as far as the front office is concerned, and now we're heading in the right direction. We can see the future.
Danny is fully involved. I also heard that yesterday, that Danny Ainge is fully involved in the process now. Danny Ainge was not on the phones at the deadline. Danny Ainge was much more, hey, let's work on this. Hey, do this. Like, he was part of the process. He is the process now.
Yeah.
Like, at the deadline, Justin Zanuck was the guy trying to make deals. And I think that's one of the reasons the deal didn't get done. There's nobody better at making deals than Danny Ainge. So I think you're going to see that. The other thing that I would say is that you're going to make multiple deals here.
Yeah.
This is not one major trade and let's go win a championship.
Yeah.
This is multiple trades, and let's see what the end product is.
You got to change the core. I mean, that's just what it is.
Exactly. And frankly, I don't really care what order the trade happens in.
Yeah.
My feeling is that you're likely going to get, I could see it one of two ways. You make a big Rudy Gobert trade, give yourself some cap space, which is another reason I really like the Bulls deal. Give yourself some cap space, and then go and make a trade for Bojan Bogdanovic that allows you to sign a free agent, maybe that brings you draft capital back in future, which is one of the reasons I like a draft night trade for Bojan Bogdanovic, because you'd really like to get back into the NBA draft this year if you can.
It's nuts. To say that the Jazz aren't in the draft this year is absolutely
terrifying.
Nuts.
It's terrifying because one of the things one of the reasons I like Charles Lee so much, the guy is an absolute talent developer. Johnny Bryant's an absolute talent developer.
Yeah.
That has to be a key component because, unfortunately, you're probably going to wind up trading Trent Forrest. You're probably going to, I would not be surprised if they traded Jared Butler. I wouldn't be surprised if they traded their younger guys, because at some point you have to give talent to the coach that works in his system.
Yeah.
Something I don't think the Jazz were very good at the last 2 years, frankly. Now I think you have to realize, hey, I'm going to hire this coach, and we're going to build a system that works for his style, and we're going to hire the coach that fits with Donovan Mitchell, which is, again, why most people think Johnny Bryant's going to be the guy.
Yeah.
But you have to start building around the people that you're going to ride with. So you're going to hire this head coach, get guys that fit the way he coaches.
Yeah.
Right? Like, get guys that, one, he's flexible enough and talented enough as a head coach to take Nikola Vucevic, who you traded for Rudy Gobert, and make the best of that until we can move him at the deadline.
Yep.
Or, hey, we're going to go out and make a huge sign and trade, and we're going to get John Wall. We're going to get Zach LaVine.
But this is what you've been saying about Danny Ainge, and I think it's a really relevant point, which is Danny Ainge is old school. Danny Ainge wants to hire a head coach that is pliable to Danny Ainge's vision and will go along with it. And I think it's ultra important in building championship contenders to understand that the struggle is going to be real early on. I mean, again, look no further than Boston right now. Like, your casual NBA fan who maybe hasn't been following the league for the last 5 years doesn't know that Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown were garbage for a minute, and then they got bounced by LeBron.
This team
Like,
talked about trading Jaylen Brown
multiple
times.
Like, they've been through the ringer, and I think that, now you're just now seeing that Jason Tatum is starting to kind of get into that, one of the best scorers in the league mentality, but he's still got so much to go. Like, there are people out there saying that he can be the next Kevin Durant the next 3 to 4 seasons. So that tells you how much he has left as far as growth. So my point in all of this is, to bring it back to the Jazz, is that Donovan Mitchell is very much going through that same process. He's just 2 years behind Jason Tatum, in my opinion.
Yes.
So that's why I say this summer, what you do, and I agree it's going to be multiple trades, but that Rudy trade is the core center of whether this summer will be successful or not. That deal will ultimately define what this team is able to do in the next 3 seasons.
All right, let's get your thoughts in here. Please make sure you give us a thumbs up and a like. By the way, while you're listening to the show, feel free to shop our affiliate links below. Everything from protein bars, the vitamins we take, you name it, it's in our affiliate links. Go check it out right now on this podcast, or if you're watching live on YouTube, thank you so much. Josh Martin, good morning to you. Thanks for the $2 tip you gave us. So you get your comment highlighted, and we're going to read you first. He says, what's the most realistic trade for Rudy Gobert? I think the most realistic trade is probably one with the Chicago Bulls, because it gives you the most benefit, in my opinion. I don't know that making a trade with Toronto, if it is, again, OG Anunoby would probably be the guy in the middle of that deal. Does he make you significantly better? He probably doesn't. And the Rudy Gobert deal has to make you significantly better.
Yes.
It has to upgrade something. And if it's OG and Gary Trent Jr., that's probably not enough. If it's those two guys and picks, okay.
Those two guys in a pick, I think, is enough.
But what I think is, again, this is why you need a third team.
Yeah.
And this is why I advocate so heavily for a third team, because it would be nice to get multiple assets from multiple teams. Give me draft picks from this club, give me talent from this club, and let's get a deal done. That's why, again, with the Jazz being, there were a lot of people who have said the Jazz were one of the third team options for a Lakers-Rockets deal that would have netted them. Christian would have been the player coming from Houston.
Big fan of that deal.
Yeah, and I just think if that truly was an option, and Russell Westbrook would have wound up in Houston, and John Wall and Eric Gordon wind up in LA, and you wind up with a Talon Horton-Tucker and a Christian Wood.
Big fan.
I would have loved that deal. I absolutely would have loved that deal. I think that would have been an epic deal, and I think you would be a better team today. But that deal didn't happen. Maybe it was never on the table. Who knows? I don't know.
Well, and I think that the other thing we have to remember, just generally speaking, like 1,000-foot view, is that Danny Ainge has a track record of putting together big trades, like big 3-4 team deals that make his team a lot better. So again, that's why I say don't be surprised if maybe this is a slow cooker thing, like it takes a couple of weeks, but something big happens. Don't be surprised by that at all.
They're going to make a deal. Yeah. I have no doubt about that. And I think that when you start to look at who those contenders are, I think if you're smart, you trade Rudy Gobert in the Eastern Conference. You do not trade him in the West. I think I still maintain that Toronto and Chicago, to answer your question directly, Josh Martin, Toronto and Chicago are absolutely the most likely destinations. And I feel like in Chicago, Vucevic is the starting point there. It's just a question of who you're willing to include in that. And again, just because it was brought up multiple times yesterday, Ayo Dosunmu is not even part of this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, if
the Bulls are not trading, Ayo Dosunmu is a young guard from Chicago.
He's an assassin.
They're not moving that kid. His upside is incredible.
Yeah.
And I understand why Jazz fans would want him. I totally understand.
I understand why anyone would want him.
I get it. They're not trading him.
Yeah.
You're not going to get, in my opinion, you're not going to get a DeMar DeRozan in that deal. And the Bulls are going to do everything they can do, I would think. Maybe not everything. They're going to do everything they're willing to do to keep Zach LaVine. They want to keep, everybody that I know in Chicago tells me they want to keep this core together.
Yeah.
And they didn't do all that work last offseason to bring in Caruso and to bring in.
Excuse me. Headband
Caruso.
I'm sorry.
Headband Caruso. Where's Jeremy Bolton?
Yeah.
But they didn't do everything they did to compete with 5 other teams to bring in Alex Caruso to then just give away Zach LaVine. They didn't do all of that to then trade away DeMar DeRozan.
We have another Woj update on coaching candidates. So he's added Frank Vogel and Jazz assistant Lamar Skeeter to the list of interviewees.
I mean, Frank Vogel is somebody that I think makes a lot of sense to interview him. I think you have to. One of the other things, and I don't know how many people realize this, but one of the other things you do when you interview veteran coaches is you find out if they're available to be an assistant. Because if you hire a Johnny Bryant, if you hire a Will Hardy,
Steve Nash.
Yeah, if you hire a Steve Nash, like Brooklyn did, those are guys that probably don't have enough relationships to build a solid staff. So if you're going to interview Terry Stotts, look at Mike D'Antoni and Steve Nash. Mike D'Antoni has been a hell of a mentor. Look at Quinn Snyder and Greg Popovich, right? Like, you need that mentor relationship. So one of the other things to keep in mind is you're gonna interview Frank Vogel, who's off of a championship in LA, by the way.
Yeah.
You're going to interview him, and you're going to test the water and say, hey, we really loved what we heard from you in our interview. Any chance you'd consider being an assistant? Any chance you consider coming in here and mentoring Will Hardy or mentoring Johnny Bryant or mentoring, Charles Lee? Don't think that those conversations are meaningless.
Yeah.
They're going to interview. And the other thing that I think is really interesting, and part of this is too, the questions that they ask these candidates are really important, because when you're talking to a guy like Frank Vogel, that's a guy that knows the Jazz really well. He coached the Lakers. Like, he knows Donovan Mitchell's game.
Yeah.
You want to know what he thinks about Donovan Mitchell.
Yeah.
You want to know what he thinks about this roster.
It's a really savvy move to get some answers out of these guys.
And to learn what other organizations and teams think. Terry Stotts is one of the better basketball minds in the NBA. You want his input on your roster.
Yeah.
So it's not just about finding out if Terry Stotts is the best head coach fit for you. You also want to develop relationships, get intel, and see if you can help build a staff.
Yeah.
So you never know why they're going to interview guys. You are certainly not interviewing. I wouldn't think you would interview Frank Vogel to be your head coach. That doesn't make a lot of sense in my opinion.
Yeah.
All right, Josh, thanks for the tip. If you guys want to send us a tip, we always appreciate it. There's a $sign at the bottom of the chat box here on YouTube. Good morning, Rudy Sanchez, George Mashika, Tanner Plummer. Hey, guys.
Mm-hmm.
Tanner, good morning.
Hey, guys.
James Knight, sup, lads, he says. Cody Strickland says, what if Quinn didn't leave because he didn't get roster control, but left because there won't be much change in the roster?
I don't think that's why.
Yeah,
he left,
I don't think
man.
he left.
I just think I think the reason I say that personally is because that's just not with where the Jazz are and what took place this past season. It's not a realistic situation. It's just not. To say that Quinn left because there won't be change is not true. To say he left because there will be change, but he's not a huge fan of what change is made, okay, that's more of a conversation. I can kind of get down with that logic, but make no mistake about it. There's going to be a lot of change in this organization as the summer wears on. And it's just a fact that that's going to happen.
Yep. Gabe Ledley, good morning to you, my friend. Neville93, Greg Hawkins. Gabe Ledley says, based on money alone, you'd think another all-star would have to be involved in the Rudy trade. You think the Jazz are looking to go big for big? That's an interesting question. I mean, Nikola Vucevic fits that bill, certainly. I mean, for everything he's not defensively, and he's not defensive at all.
Yeah.
He certainly is an all-star, and he's certainly a guy that can put the ball in the bucket. So I think that's a really good point, Gabe. I mean, I that wouldn't surprise me at all. The Mavericks, but Monty, Dallas has nothing to offer. For Zach LaVine, I think Zach would love to be in Dallas. I just don't think they have the money to offer him.
Well, and I think that the Jazz, again, it needs to continue to be said. I don't think there's a willingness to trade Rudy in the West. I just don't think.
Well, for Rudy Gobert, they're certainly, they just don't have.
Like in that the 3-team thing, like
why would you do that?
Like, you can't have, if you're Danny Ainge looking at the West, you know that the West once again, it's going to get better this coming season. Like, I have to think that teams like the Nuggets and the Lakers are going to be better. You can't tell me that LeBron is going to have 2 seasons in a row where he just, his team, not him personally, but his team is terrible. You can't tell me that that's the case. You can't tell me the Lakers are going to be trifling around with, Russ and that broke-ass jump shot for the whole season. I just can't believe it, So if you look at that, all right, let's assume the Lakers are an 8 seed this year. Okay, so you've got the Warriors, Memphis, you've got Phoenix, you've got yourself, Utah, you've got Dallas, and you have the Lakers. And by the way, we're not even talking about Kawhi and Paul George and the Clippers. So that's my point. You're not going to put Rudy Gobert on any of those teams.
My other question is, what do you do with Rudy Gay? Because that's a guy that's got 2 more years.
Prime piece to be moved, in my opinion.
Yeah, he's got 2 more years with this club, and I think the second one's a player option. But, I mean, you have 2 more years left with him, so it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, he didn't sniff the playoffs. He did not sniff it.
But again, that was a Quinn thing, right? It was well documented that Quinn didn't feel like he had a good matchup against Dallas, so maybe that changes with whoever they bring in. You know?
Kane Urin says Rudy's going to be hard to trade. Your return will be less than you want. Picks would be great, certainly. Josh Lovern says Rudy for Zion. Nah, I'm fine.
I'm good.
OG and Gary from Toronto would be really nice for Rudy, but it's not just Rudy. We need to get rid of Mike Conley. Who wants washed, expensive old Conley? I think Mike Conley has real value.
I think that's a hater thing
I think
to say,
he's a guy that finishes off your roster. I think that if you just look at Boston doesn't have a pure point guard. I mean, and the issue is that Marcus Smart is not a gifted shooter, even though he can knock it down and he loves to hit big threes. But he's not polished. I look at teams like Dallas. I think Dallas needs a facilitator. Luka off the basketball is better.
Yeah.
I look at Miami. I think Miami and what Pat Riley said about Kyle Lowry the other day.
Seriously,
you got to be a professional basketball player and you got to be in shape. I mean, that's unbelievable. I mean, there are teams out there that I think value Mike Conley.
Yeah.
If you wanted to make a Mike Conley deal, I think you could absolutely make a Mike Conley deal. Josh Levern says, what did Tanner say? I can imagine the marketing campaign now, Josh, on Zion coming to Utah. Josh said, come watch the best player to play 85 games in the last 3 years. Exactly right. Exactly right. And he is a little chunky. Giggity says, whichever team is willing to take on Rudy will need to be okay with not winning a championship. I agree with that. I think Rudy, as long as you have multiple offensive stars,
yes,
you're going to be fine. I think Rudy Gobert's best value offensively is clearly rebounding. He is the best lob player in the NBA, in my opinion. And I think he sets a really good screen.
Yes, he does.
Whether they're legal or not doesn't matter, because unless they blow the whistle, it's illegal.
No stop,
yeah,
buddy.
Man. I mean, Rudy Gobert's best value is offensive rebounding, lobbing, and setting unbelievable screens. Can you imagine DeMar DeRozan coming off of a Rudy Gobert rub screen at the top?
Yeah, dude.
Like hitting that mid-range jumper?
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. That's why I think the Bulls are the best option for the Jazz, because, again, Rudy doesn't fit with a team that wants to have a track meet. Like, Rudy doesn't fit in Charlotte, right? But I think there's a deal to be had with Charlotte and the Jazz in some, way, shape, or form. Rudy fits really, really well with Chicago and secondarily Toronto. Chicago's prime because, again, just like you just said, they've got multiple scoring options. He doesn't need to score for them to win.
They play effectively in the mid-range.
Like, they play a slower brand of basketball in the mid-range that plays to Rudy's skill set. That's why I think for the Bulls, it works. And
they shoot a lot of threes.
Yeah, so he can rebound the hell out of the ball.
Yeah, he's a great. There's no doubt he's a great fit in Chicago. I'm telling you, it's just simply a matter of what can you get in return. I would want more than Vucevic and Patrick Williams. I would need a Javonte Green. I would need a bottom roster player, and because I want athletic ability in this Jazz roster, they have got to build depth so that you can play 9 guys.
Yeah.
You've got to build depth into this roster because
talent development's going to be crucial, bro.
You're looking at the 2 best teams in the NBA have depth. The 2 best teams, like you look at Golden State, has legitimate depth. whether that's Otto Porter, Poole, like, I mean,
Kuminga.
like you have depth. Like you look at the teams that struggle in this league. The Lakers struggled to get anything off their bench, including Russell Westbrook. You look at any of the teams that went out early in the playoffs didn't have depth. Ultimately, what hurt Dallas? They became a one-player team. They lived with Luka and they died with Luka. Like, they need more. This Jazz team needs more. You need more than Jordan Clarkson. You need more than Hassan Whiteside.
Yeah.
Those are the guys. Look at the playoffs. Like, you didn't even, again, not to be redundant, you didn't even see Rudy Gay.
Yeah.
Like, he just didn't play. Let's see. Will the Thrill says Ben Simmons for Rudy. I'm fine. James
That's
Knight
not
says,
what we're about.
are we certain Rudy's gone? I mean, I would, at this point, I'd put it at 85, 90%.
Yeah.
They are aggressively, and if you're just tuning into the show, appreciate you guys being here. Please give us a thumbs up. Give us a like. It really helps the channel grow. We really appreciate you guys doing that. But again, you know, I was talking to guys around the NBA yesterday, and the Utah Jazz are the most aggressive team on the phones right now. And they are working to make a deal.
Yeah.
And the one thing I did not hear consistently is that they are, like, I don't know that they're working to get back in this year's draft. I don't. It'll be interesting to see what they do.
Well, I don't think Danny's ever been a big draft guy. I mean, again, the one thing you can take away from the presser is that he's not prioritizing the draft per se this season. I mean, he straight up said that the draft and other like deadlines as far as the summer is concerned have zero impact on coaching or anything like that. So somebody who is prioritizing the draft would say, yeah, we need to get a hire done before the draft and be ready.
And the problem with the draft is multifold. If you are going to build through the draft, that's a long process.